So, Ajantha Ranaweera, hello.
Yes. Hi, Marguerite.
Hi. This is your second solo exhibition ever
Yes.
at Dance of the Water Garden, and it's at Paradise Road, which is a wonderful feat. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you very much.
I'm really happy to talk to you and learn more about you. We know each other already, but I've never really sat
And
down.
also have seen the exhibition, so.
You've seen, yes, I was there.
Yes.
I saw it sell out in a flash. I was so impressed with that. It was amazing to see all those little red stickers fill up on each of the painting faster than we could work.
I like the selling bit, but I also saw a lot of people enjoying it and then
talking about it. I know that was really wonderful to see, and also your engagement with them, to be able to stand there and talk to them for a while, describe what they were seeing, answer their questions.
It was challenging because you had so many people, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting how people are very much engaged with it and then mix comments on it, the subject, the technique.
Yeah, people were curious, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so I want to know, before we start talking about Dance of the Water Garden, I want to know a little bit about your first inspirations as a child. I mean, when we know what we're going to do with our lives, you know, you're a skilled designer and an architect by trade, but I know that in your heart you've always been an artist.
Yeah.
So I've always been a writer, and I remember my very first inspirations, the things that people were most proud of, you know, that I did or that I also felt the most proud. So do you have like one or two firsts that you got so excited about that made you know that you'd be an artist in your life?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, what I would actually think of is, okay, we had a neighbor.
Was it a painting? Oh yeah.
Yeah, so it was drawing.
It was drawing.
I had a neighbor, right? So we shared the same surname, right? So whenever we go to their house, he would give me crayons and I would just draw. And this is even before I started school. And what he did was he collected all these things every day. And then later on, I think when I was doing my O-levels, he actually came and gave me an entire file full of
all of your drawings.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Which I didn't know that it existed even.
So he was encouraging you?
More or less. I think he saw something in it, right?
What kinds of things would you draw back then? Or do you still have all of that?
Yeah, I think I do.
So what did you see? And when you look at it now, what did you see? What were the first things that were coming up?
Animals, nature. I mean, it changes. I think the notion of it would be the variety of things that I've start looking at and then enjoy drawing and expressing these things more than,
So he was the first one who really celebrated what you were doing and encouraged what you were doing.
Which I didn't know till he gave me all this.
Yeah. Now, over time, I'm sure that you tried and explored so many different mediums.
Yeah.
Was there anything that you really practiced, but then you just decided that it wasn't right for you?
Mostly drawing. Honestly, I didn't think of drawing as a form of art. It's so natural for me, like being an architect also. I just constantly draw. Like if I'm explaining something to you, right? And then I'm trying to figure out like a building or trying to explain to you something, I would always draw. I'm a visual person. Even a theory in school, or if it's like a math sum or anything like that, biology question. For me, it's easier to kind of draw and explain things and then say, look here, these are the components and this is how things come together.
Yeah, I've actually seen you do that for me before.
Yes.
He says, give me a piece of paper, Marguerite.
Give me a piece of paper.
This is how it works. And
yes.
then you draw it.
Because it's in my head and I am not very good in explaining it verbally, but I need a visual mechanism for it, like a flow diagram or drawing or something like that.
Most artists, I think, they feel that way, that are like that, you know. But I think you actually do have a pretty healthy and concrete way to describe a lot of your work. I was thinking about I follow you on Instagram and I follow your stories. Modern Sri Lankan design is what comes up a lot. And I was thinking about like what does that mean, modern Sri Lankan design?
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, without getting into the story of contemporary versus modern, what do those words mean to you in the simplest way?
So this is something that I've started looking at during Corona time. So I had a lot of time, and so it started in architecture basically. So I was looking into ways in which we design and how do we design. And I mean, look, Sri Lanka is progressing in a massive way. We have been through an economic crisis, and right now it's to look towards future and see how do we grow out of this, and how do we expand, and how do we become a developed nation,
Yeah.
right? So in those terms, how do we kind of look at it from a creative point of view in the creative industries, right? How do we produce a global product without losing our identity? So that's where modern Sri Lankan design came up.
You've talked about decolonizing artistic expression. I've read that. And I was thinking about that's a lot to unpack, thinking about decolonizing artistic expression. So I think my first question in that regard would be, in order to understand in plain terms, how is an artist colonized in the first place? Or how is art colonial, or considered even in modern days when it's no longer a colony? How is it colonized? So what does that mean?
It's always to do with thinking. Right now it's how, when I say decolonizing, and I say decolonizing knowledge, and it's to do with your mindset. How do we break away from that colonial mindset? And modern Sri Lankan design is part of it. How do we kind of approach, and it's not a nationalist or anything like that, right?
But how is art colonized in the first place? How would a piece, if we talk about a very simple piece of art, or the expression of that work, how is it considered, how would you decolonize it? How do you know that it's colonized? Like
let me bring an example from design, right? So the first thing one would do is, when you look at knowledge, right? Knowledge is written on the design, architecture, or art, right? Majority of it is Eurocentric. And what happens here is, some of our knowledge is not readily available, it's not written enough, and it's not decoded for us, and it's not easily available.
Sri Lankan design, you mean?
Sri Lankan, regional, Asian, right? And we don't have a lot of access to it, or most of the knowledge is yes, there, but not in the internet. So it's not there, right? The first thing is to reach those knowledges, right?
Right. And what are the repercussions of those knowledges not being available?
So whatever we produce become more or less Eurocentric.
Okay.
So the whole idea is to have a balance, right? Best of both worlds for us, and whatever knowledge is coming from Europe. And most of our knowledges are still, I would say, stuck with linguists, right? So we are still decoding something like rasa theory, right? For me, that explains a lot of things that I found difficult explaining through some of the European theory.
So what is rasa theory for the people who don't know? Can you tell it in very, very plain terms?
Okay, so it's like a theory that comes up in Bharatanatyam. It's Bharata Muni's Natya Sastra. It's a dance form. It's a regional dance form originated in India, right? And if I'm not mistaken, it's written down in 2nd century BCE, right, before current era, before Christ.
Okay.
Right? So in that, there's a thing called rasa theory, right, where we talk about how do we project feelings onto the audience. The conductor of the stage play, intentionally, how do we project certain feelings? So there are two kinds of feelings, which are the permanent feeling, and then there's something called vyabhachari, which is like sanchari, like it comes and goes, right? and a combination of that. And that's exactly what an artist, a designer, and an architect would do.
Any kind of artist really
Yeah.
is trying to project a feeling, whether it's dance or, okay, so if that knowledge in the sense is colonized and you're trying to, or you're working toward decolonizing that artistic expression, how is that that decolonization happening in, how is the rasa theory translate?
So
Can you
there are
make the tie?
yeah. So I
Yeah.
would say for me there are three aspects of it, right? The first would be the thinking itself, right? For me to start thinking about something bigger and without kind of limiting myself to a certain area of expertise, knowledge, and thinking, right? So that's number one. Number two is the process, right? How do you produce this? The process in which this piece of art gets created, right? So in that, like for example, how do we decolonize would be looking into color. So I've gone around looking at temple murals, right? Taking photograph of it, and those certain murals, and whether it's in temples or somewhere else, would generate certain feelings and emotions within you, right?
Right.
So then what I would do is I would kind of look at the color combinations of it and in what percentages the colors would do.
Okay.
So
So
that
deconstructing that?
exactly
Okay.
deconstructing it and reconstructing it within the artwork itself, trying to use those color combinations but modernized.
Okay.
So same goes with the lines, how we have used lines, how can we take that and kind of make it modern, and how do you make it kind of appropriate for the current times, right?
So I guess in your design training, you've learned how to decode what is modern and what is not in terms of the colors and the lines and
figures.
Yeah, and the figures.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll tell you something which is very interesting. So this is something that I'm working on currently for the last, I don't know, one and a half years. If you look at most of the statues in Sri Lanka, like in Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa periods, you would see like a stone kind of statue right now. But they were never like that during those days. We had something called an eggshell plaster, a thin plaster encasing it, right? And we would paint. So all those statues were very colorful.
Yeah.
So were the buildings. You would see something similar in Sigiriya, the boundary wall, and some of the buildings in Kandy.
How do you know what colors they were at the time?
You have a little, I mean...
There's some remnants? That
You
give
have remnants,
yeah.
and then you have records of it written, right?
Written what colors they were?
Yeah, so basically when you kind of, not a lot, but when you take those things, right? And then you kind of see, okay, so how do I use this in my artwork,
Yeah.
right? And how do I use these combinations? How do I kind of reimagine planes in which I draw? It took me a while from my first exhibition to second one,
Yeah.
right? First exhibition, it was just very tiny kind of sizes.
Okay.
And now it's just 4 times bigger.
Yeah, so do you really plan that then when you're doing a piece? Or do you sit down and think through those steps of how you're going to transcribe these elements and decolonize them in a sense? Well, by shifting and transforming them from yesterday to today? How does that work in the process?
I would say it's something that works subconsciously and consciously. I think the subconscious level would be around 40% or 60%, and the conscious would be maybe 40%, right? So I mean, look, that's where the thinking comes in. I think when I get into the process, if I have done the research, and it's not a research that I would do just 2 days before I start. I think it's a lifetime of learning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and looking at things and then
Yeah.
trying to decode things and questioning.
Right, so you actually wouldn't, if you just walked into the country today, you would never be able to do these things because it's a lifelong, your life of living in Sri Lanka, learning the history of Sri Lanka, studying the country, studying everything that you've seen.
Yeah, and also I think it's to do a lot with people I have met. So I mean, my guru first, who taught me ABCs of design, is Anjalendran, right? So he taught me a lot of things, and also most importantly, he's the one who taught me how to look, right? A lot of people I've seen, especially design students, right? They miss a lot of things, but he's the first one who told me like, look, right? When you go to a place, start looking, and he actually encouraged me to travel a lot and look at things, which is a habit right now. Right?
So as far as working with other students, when you work and you mentor other students now, do you feel like this concept of, do you teaching this concept of decolonizing artistic expression? Do you feel that it liberates them in some sense in their work, or are any of them transformed from, you know, a more colonized artistic expression to the like how does that work in their minds? How do you?
I think it's just.
Or do you inspire them to that?
I'm just, how do I say, planting seeds.
Planting seeds.
Yes,
okay.
That's about it.
Yeah.
And then what happens is, people will take their own kind of time, own kind of approach, and it'll take them maybe years of kind of looking into things, and maybe they understand it. I think what I'm trying to tell you is they know that there's something like this, but whether they truly understand it would be somewhere, I mean, a couple of years down the line.
It takes some time to figure out. Yeah. So what are the challenges that Sri Lanka is facing today, and in terms of just thinking about how artists play a role in shaping the future of this country? What are the challenges that today's artists are facing?
I think the major challenge that I see is globalization, and how do we kind of retain our identity within that globalization, and being modern without losing our identity. It's like, me trying to modernize you, but after you become modern, you have lost everything about Marguerite.
Yeah.
You're like some different person.
Yeah.
So is that the way for us to go forward? I mean, it's one way of looking at it is, how do we modernize, but deeply rooted in history, right? But we create a global product.
Right.
Right. And we are also a nation that wants to develop and, go beyond boundaries, and then transform ourselves into a developed nation and high GDP, right? And per capita income. And so also it's interesting that we always have to see that we don't get lost on the figures and numbers and all, but also have our version. What is the Sri Lankan version of doing that?
Yeah. So how do Sri Lankans? Do you think Sri Lankans have the desire to retain that? Is that a natural instinct to want to retain some of those authentic roots for some, or how do you encourage that, or do you want to encourage that?
I don't know. Like I can speak for myself.
Yeah. How has it worked for you?
For me, in my practice, that's why we started something called Modern Sri Lankan Design. Right? It's something new, rooted in history, open to the world. Because I see in design industry that we are producing, age-old things over and over and over again to a society that has no relevance to that object, right? But how do we take that object and make something current without losing our identity and the character that we have in that, but catering to the modern, generation?
So do you think that the answer to that is also to spend a lot of time studying the history of Sri Lanka? So studying...
It is part of it.
Yeah.
Because without knowing history, I don't think we have a grounding, right? And for you to be Sri Lankan is to also understand what is Sri Lanka and the heritage, because we have a rich heritage. But it doesn't mean that we have to replicate that heritage one-on-one.
Right.
Like a snapshot in
evolve.
time. Exactly.
Yeah.
How do we evolve?
How
do we cater to the modern times and future? and but in a Sri Lankan way.
Yeah.
Right.
So how will your work evolve? How? Yeah.
So it's constantly evolving.
What do you? I want to know also about anything that takes you out of your comfort zone in art. I want to know what you might be a little bit afraid of trying that you might one day try. Maybe you already know. You seem like quite a calculated guy, so maybe you already know what you're doing next. But even after that,
yeah. So
first tell me what you're doing next.
There are a few things that I have been working on for the last, I think, 1.5 years. The thing with me is that I would not put it out if it's not ready. Right?
But what is it? Is it a different medium? Are you moving into something different?
I think I'm definitely going bigger in size and scale.
Okay.
That's one that we are looking into, right? And then different mediums. I think I hinted before eggshell plast and but it won't be literal. One thing that I can tell you is I hate literal.
Okay.
Stuff, right? It's not going to be literal, but it can be something along those lines, right? Which is interesting. Do we have to kind of work on pieces of paper? Not that it won't have a combination, right, of things, but we are looking into different scales, sizes, mediums, and maybe, I don't know, installations.
So even when you talk about the eggshell and the sculpture, it makes me think of the layering question. So I mean, even in Dance of the Water Garden, I can see, as a non-artist myself, that you're working with line drawing, pen drawing, right, in a two-dimensional space. But then you're also doing watercolor. So can you tell me a little bit more about how in this collection, how you worked at layering and what is the process? Or
I love mixed media.
Okay.
That's one of the things which I kind of really want to pursue, because it kind of frees me up. Because it does not put me, okay, you have to use this medium and that medium works on this way and you have to stick to that, right? I basically use everything under the sun, right? Honestly, my first collection, my first exhibition, most of it, the figures and all, I started drawing with sticks. People who bought it might actually not know it, but they were, some of it were drawn with sharpened rambutan sticks, bamboo sticks. Because during that time, I've done manual drafting, so my lines are very precise. So I wanted to break away from it because they are very sharp, very precise. I can do parallel lines. So that's one of the ways that I kind of wanted to break off from the usual technical kind of drawing. But I think in this collection, I kind of embrace my technical drawing abilities. So you have a mix of both worlds. And then layering. I mean, it takes a long time to produce one drawing,
right,
because of the layering.
Right, you have to let it dry. You have to put it aside. So and then maybe it has something else in your mind when you look at it again.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then how kind of certain material works on it is different. And I would use diverse, types of ink. From acrylic to watercolor, color pencils, you name it, everything under the sun is there, right? Brushes to brush pens to, everything. So it's just, I think it's more towards how do I get a certain feeling out of this drawing than what do I use on it.
Right. Now, looking at a collection on the whole, how do you determine what would be some of the cohesive aspects? Is that just something that happens in retrospect, or you use some very organic, not in these I can't see so much, but there's some human forms in there, and there's also some natural, there's some plant life and underwater life, as it appeared to me.
Yeah.
Is that just something that comes spontaneously, or do you plan that?
So again, it's about me kind of reimagining. Again, it goes back to the studies that I've done, right? So again, if you look at temple murals, most of it, temple murals or any other mural, right? that we have, but majority of murals that we have right now are temples. They are not literal, they're stylized. So I wanted to kind of take that stylization and wanted to make it modern and current.
Right.
Right.
So it's a work of the imagination in this,
Exactly.
back and then and still now.
Yes. And then you add color onto it and you question, how do I show a building, but in a stylistic formation? How do I, there's one particular drawing that I did, which is, how do I show a garden which is as big as a mountain, like Siripad, Adam's Peak, right? And how do I, without showing it literally, how do I stylize it? So I used giant flowers to kind of draw this whole garden. But then I realized, how do I show the scale? It's just a flower for somebody who looks at it, right? And then I added just tiny building formations to show scale. So yeah, so it's ever evolving, and I want to make it like progressive.
So the future work that you have that you're going to give us a sneak peek about does that also very influenced by your architecture background, or?
Absolutely, because for me the nice thing about being an architect, and which I've learned at an early age, is not to distinguish art, architecture, and design. Right? For me, it's overlapping. It's the same thing.
They inform each other.
Exactly.
Yeah,
what I do in architecture influences my art. My art influences design, and design influences architecture, and both art. Right.
That's beautiful.
So that's how it is, because I cannot just streamline myself in one avenue.
Discipline. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
It never works for me.
Yeah. To do it all.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm like doing 100 things
That's wonderful.
at a given time, and it relates. If I'm, for example, like, I'll tell you something that I've done recently, a very simple thing, right? I saw this particular pattern in a mural, so I've taken that pattern and made a repetitive pattern, right? So it was just actually a part of a drawing, which I made into a repetitive pattern. Now, which might go on one of these future projects and go on a surface, and it might be a metal surface, and we might stamp this pattern onto that metal surface, and that metal surface is this high.
Yeah.
Right. So, look, it involves a lot of craft also. So I've been talking to a lot of jewelry makers and people who work with brass, not only just paint.
Right.
So it might have elements of drawing and paint and things. So that's what I like about it. And I think this idea has been, I've been kind of working on it for nearly like 6 months right now.
Okay. So Ajantha, so you've been really dancing around what's coming next. I really want to know a little bit more concretely. Are you going to be doing this kind of two-dimensional work, or is there something you've been hinting at, the eggshell painting, the sculpture? Is there something concrete that's coming, and what is it?
So
and not just one piece. I actually want to know, how is your work moving? Is it changing? Tell me about the direction in general.
So the next collection is going to be completely different from what I have done so far.
Okay.
Scale-wise, that's number one.
Okay. Meaning it's going to be giant?
It's going to be massive.
Oh,
very big.
Okay.
So I've been working out the technicalities on this, right? So it's not easy to jump from a smaller size to a larger size in the technique that I do.
Okay.
It took me 2.5 years to jump from an A3 size to A1 size.
Okay.
So let's try to do it like maybe within the next 6 to 1 year.
Okay.
But that has been developing for the last 1.5 years, right? So one is scale, and the other thing is we are moving into 3D objects.
That means sculpture.
Let's not name it as sculpture. Maybe
Okay.
it can be something different, right?
And then
So
the
it could,
materials?
yes, so it will be metal
Okay.
and different other materials involved in it. And the other thing, Marguerite, that I kind of do with my exhibitions is that I have a variety of things. Right now it's just you have some with a garden, some just with boys, and then some with built formations like these paintings, right? And then there are some with combinations of these, right?
Okay.
But the same kind of ethos will continue towards the next.
In the 3D.
Yes.
Okay.
So you will
In
have
large
some
scale.
large 3D objects, small 3D objects. You have two-dimensional paintings for those who like these things, and it will always have this unique color combinations, and they are very Sri Lankan, those color combinations.
And you'll include the layering that
Absolutely.
you love.
They
Yeah.
will have multiple layers,
Yeah.
and that's what takes a lot of time, but that's what's nice about it also.
What's your inspiration for making things bigger?
I think it's to do with, again, rasa theory. It's the
Okay.
impact. It's the feeling that I'm trying to project.
Okay.
So for me, how do I get the same feeling when I show a painting this size, or imagine that this same painting that I scale it up 10 times, and you are literally immersed within the painting itself. You are right in the middle of it, and the whole painting is around you. So if that's the type of painting that you have done, how would you feel, right?
If you were walking in the painting.
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
you become a part of that itself,
That sounds beautiful.
right?
Yeah.
It might be just few because I love limited collections, so maybe we might do like a few of those, but yeah, so this is where we are heading towards the end of this year, and then definitely towards next year.
Beautiful.